After failing to tell a good story in verse, Chaucer ends up, perhaps out of revenge, tells a very long prose story called Melibee. Now, before he begins Melibee, he gives us a little church doctrine on the theory of interpretation or exegesis. It is a moral tale virtuous, albeit taken some time in sundry ways, of sundry folk as I shall you devise. It's a moral tale, but it can be interpreted differently by different people. In other words, in sundry ways by sundry people. That's an old English word, and it's a great word. It means separate, individual, distinct, different. And you immediately think of the wife of Bath, how she reads in sundry ways. It also makes you think of the prioress's tale. Like, why do we interpret text the way we do, each one of us so differently? It's in her Benedictio. Pray for us, we sinful folk unstable, that of his mercy God so merciable. On us his great mercy multiply for reverence of his mother Mary. Amen. We have no stability. We're prone to constant change. We're vacillating, inconsistent, easily swayed. In fact, that's what the partner is always dependent upon, right? And that's also Melibee's character when he tries to figure out how he should respond to a bunch of people who dived into his house and robbed his home and attacked his wife and daughter. But Chaucer understands the Bible as a text reflective of these sundry writers. Imperfect, contradictory, that's what the wife of Bath is always trying to exploit. Unstable, the product of human writers. But nevertheless, they're also inspired writers. It doesn't appear to be unified. That's why the wife of Bath is such an inventive reader. She exploits contradictions to make new arguments. As thus ye wot that every evangelist, every gospel writer that telleth us the pain of Jesu Christ, he's talking about the passion and the crucifixion, ne saith not all thing as his fellow doeth. They don't always say it in the same way, but natheless their sentence, their meaning is all soth, it's all true, and all according as in their sentence, all be there in their telling difference. That they may tell the story differently, but the meaning is the same. For some of them say more, and some saying less. This is not only a defense of the modern, it's also a medieval idea, this unity of the text. How different texts within one book can come together regardless of its sundry and unstable ways. And think about, for example, the Canterbury Tales, where discourses are contradicting each other. How do we unify that? When they his piteous passion express, I mean of Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, but doubtless their sentence is all one. Through interpretation, they are harmonized. There is an accord. And an accord also means there's peace. And isn't that what Melibee is about? Resolving the disharmony of competing discourses. This is not simply a defense of an interpretive practice attached to theology. Chaucer is also talking about his own book, The Canterbury Tales. Therefore, lordings, all I you beseech. Beseeching is a petitionary formulaic term. If that you think I vary as in my speech. That is, he's saying, my text is unstable. It's sundry. As thus, though that I tell somewhat more of Proverbs than ye had heard before, comprehended in this little treatise here to enforce the with the effect of my matière, with my subject matter. The proverbs that I throw into this treatise are there to reinforce the effect of the subject. He's talking about the material of his discussion, his discourse. Substitute the word proverbs for all sorts of genres that appear in this book. The sheer variety of texts found in the Canterbury Tales. Fabliaux, romances, and you'll see that Melibee as a treatise is here to help you understand the variety of Chaucer's material, his text. And it's quite an amazing text if you get beyond the joke, right? The host asks for prose, and Chaucer says, "All right, I will," and gives him this long text. And not only is it long, it's boring. Melibee's always been my favorite text of all the books. But you have to read it askance. You have to read it horizontally. You have to read it as if it's in a network in relation to other texts in the book. You have to allow for interpretive substitutions to see what the text is really talking about. But you have to also think about this text being placed within the context of other texts. That's what a frame narrative does. It takes individual texts and puts them in relationship to other ones. Melibee, in a way, is about self-governance. And it relates self-governance similarly to The Wife of Bath with words and understanding. How to understand a text, that's The Wife of Bath. Here, how to understand counsel. How do we work through so many contradictory arguments? Now, it's very different from The Wife of Bath in that The Wife of Bath's notion of self-governance has a sort of self-interested, domineering side, right? You notice the way she domineers the text. In many ways, she's like Queen Proserpina. She bears down on the contradictory text and forces it to make the reading she wants, right? She extracts readings out of contradictions. There's nothing conflictual about Prudence's ideal understanding of language and reading. What does Prudence want? Melibee's worried that if he follows his wife's advice and changes his mind, what will they think of him, taking the advice of a woman? This is all prose. This Melibee answered unto his wife Prudence, I purpose not, quoth he, to work by thy counsel for many causes and reasons. I do not intend to follow your counsel, for certes, every wight would hold me then a fool. That is to say, if I for thy counseling would change in things that have been ordained and affirmed by so many we's, if I change my position over something we've already agreed upon, all these wise people agreed upon, I'd be considered a fool. Secondly, I say that all women been wicked, and none good of them all. For of 1,000 men, saith Solomon, I found one good man, but certeth of all women, good woman found I never. We've heard this example of auctoritas previously in The Merchant's Tale. Melibee is basically fretting over the Wife of Bath's doctrine. And also, certes, if I governed be by thy counsel, it should seem that I had given to thee over me the mastery. And God forbid that it so were. For Jesus Sirach saith that if the wife have mastery, she is contrarious to her husband. Prudence's reaction is the opposite of Pluto's wife. She reasons with him, and he listens. She models good interpretive practices. It's kind of like we're returning to the Franklin's Tale, that self-respect. And once she harmonizes this problematic text coming from Solomon, and he agrees, he explains why. He agrees because he feels like it's good to be governed by her sweet words. Now, Prudence is not happy about this, and she reveals that her intents are very different from the wife of Bath's when she forces Jenkins to surrender. When Melibee had heard the words of his wife Prudence, he said thus, I say well that the word of Solomon is sooth, is true. He saith that words that been spoken discreetly by ordinance been honeycombs, for they given sweetness to the soul and wholesomeness to the body. The text, the religious text, scripture, is like a honeycomb. And because of thy sweet word is an eke, for I have essayed and proved thy great sapience. I have proven to myself that you are wise, and thy great truth I will govern me by thy counsel in all things. He must learn to govern himself, to choose between contrary words, not be seduced by sweet words. But why is Melibee seduced by sweet words? Because it's found in his name. Mel is Latin for honey, and it implies his easy seduction. Thy name is Melibee. This is to say, a man that drinketh honey. Thou hast drunken so much honey of sweet temporal riches and delices and honors of this world that thou art drunken and hast forgotten Jesus Christ thy Creator. Prudence's advice to Melibee on counsel, weighing rhetorical discourses, is an interesting hinge for the Canterbury Tales. There's an interrogation here that Chaucer finds himself asking himself as he writes, what is this text you're writing? Is it worth all the effort? Prudence is also asking us not to be dragged around and seduced by the words of the prioress's sinful folk unstable, or Chaucer's sundry folk, or Prudence's great multitude of people, full chargent and full honest to hear. How are we to approach the great diversity of voices and texts, all of them contradictory, especially when we're talking about the problem of wives, and draw a conclusion or sentence? We're supposed to do interpretive work, Chaucer says in Melibee's prologue, to harmonize, or better, to find an accord. That's the peace Prudence is after in all these competing voices. Prudence also asks both the writer and us an important question. It's always about interpretation. And as touching the proposition which that the physicians increased in this case, this is to say that in maladies that one contrary is nourished by another contrary, I would fain know how you understand this text and what is your sentence. How do you interpret it? Now as to the second point, whereas your wise consoleurs counselled you to restore your house with great diligence, I would fain know how that ye understand the words and what is your sentence. Analyze what they're saying to you and interpret them. In our next episode, we'll talk about the monk's tale and fortune.
Alright guys, don't forget to like and subscribe and ring that notification bell.